Morning Fish Keepers, Cam here from thefishroom.co.nz. We've got John here from Love Fish Keeping. We've done it, we've made always on the Red Bull. Must be strong stuff today.
It's been a long day.
Yeah, and it's only Thursday for you. At least it's Friday for me. How good?
You win.
Oh, that's hot. Okay, cool. We've got a guest sitting in the wings for us as per normal. Enough of us incoherently rambling. We'll bring on our guest. Good morning, Jackie from Project Piaba. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us. It's much appreciated.
I don't have any fun designs on my cup.
All right, you've got a cup. That's a start. That's all we need. If I drink too much coffee too quickly, we'll run out before the end of the show.
Which it does often.
Yeah, pretty much every time. So can you please tell people who you are and basically what you do?
Sure. So I'm the director of outreach with Project Piaba, and we're a completely volunteer run. So I have a day job, actually a couple of them, but we're a completely volunteer run organization that works with the aquarium fisheries of the Rio Negro region in Brazil. So as the director of outreach, I do a lot of talking to people, and I do some of our social media stuff, which is hilarious to me because I'm one of the least tech savvy people on earth. So to do like something on YouTube, I'm like, I guess I'll figure it out for the fish.
For the fish.
So I do a lot of outreach and talking to people. I was originally trained as an educator, so I did a lot of like programs and stuff like that. So we have like a lot of fishy themed science labs and things like that we teach as well.
Cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How did you become involved with Project Piaba?
Very much accidentally. That was a boat behind me.
I was going to say, is that the fire alarm that we were talking about earlier?
Fire alarm. Don't even say the FA word. Yeah, no, there's a couple of boats behind me that'll probably come and go whenever I'm talking, honestly. I don't know how they time it, but they do. But so I kind of fell into it backwards. Like I've been a fish keeper my whole life and have always had an interest in it. And then at my day job, I ran into the executive director of Project Piaba, who also at the time, this was a million years ago, we worked in the same place. And then it was kind of like, oh, I've got this project with these fish you might be interested in. And I was like, oh, I like fish. And so ever since it's been, and that was in 2007. So it's been a while. Sort of like my involvement in the project has changed a little bit over the years. But I do a lot of like, programs and teaching, and I feel kind of like the, like I do a lot of, talking to people about the project. I feel almost like a Jehovah's Witness. Like, have you heard about wild fisheries? Because basically the gist of it is that it's such a counterintuitive project. Like, when I started, I had two jobs at the time, and one of those jobs was at PetSmart, which is like a big box fish store. And so I worked at the fish counter, and people would come in all the time to buy fish, and they'd be like browsing and everything. And then, so there was like this magical short time period when I was involved in PetSmart and Project Piaba. And so everybody that came in and looked at fish, I was like, what do you think about these cardinal tetras? Aren't they beautiful? And everyone would be like, oh yeah, they're beautiful. And I'd be like, so if you could choose where the fish that you keep come from, would you choose one that was raised on a farm, or would you choose one that's wild caught? And 100% of the time, people said, I want the farm raised one. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why? And 100% of the time they said, because I care about the environment. And it was like, well, wait a minute. This is actually, that's probably why with this particular fish and this particular fishery, you should actually probably choose the other one. And it's counterintuitive because we've been trained to sort of think that, extractive resource use is always bad for the environment. But in this case, it's the primary driver of conservation in the region, because it's the one way of making a living that people can have that requires protecting the ecosystem, because the fish are actually quite sensitive. Cardinal tetras, they die if you look at them wrong, and they don't tolerate bad water chemistry. They don't tolerate pollution in their habitat. They don't tolerate any kind of destructive industries happening, not just where they are, but upstream of them and in the watershed. So the people who are involved in the fishing activity are such fierce protectors of the rainforest because it's the way that they make their living. So once you kind of talk to people about that, they were like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but I never thought about it. So then that's kind of where we went with, oh, we've got, now we've got this counterintuitive idea that we need to promote to people in a way that, people who are trying to do the right thing can be more informed about their decisions. So that's the basis of a lot of work that we do. And also, so the thing that's changed since my involvement in the project is that back, in the 90s, the only place you could buy a cardinal tetra from was from the wild. But they've since have gotten into being able to captive raise them on an industrial scale. Like people were able to breed them, here and there, but not the way that you think of like fish farms. And so since that happened, now there's so much more competition in the market, and the people who are doing the fishing haven't really changed the way that they fish or the way that they handle the fish since the 1950s when the industry started in the region. And so there's been a lot of advancement in our understanding of fish biology and how to how to handle fish gently and how to protect them through shipping and things like that. Nutrition is a big deal, and lots of advancements in how to keep fish have happened. So we've been doing a lot of work trying to incorporate modern ways of transporting and feeding and keeping fish in ways that improve the health and the welfare of the fish through the supply chain and make it a more competitive product. With now there's competition, the fish can come from anywhere in the world. But only the ones that are wild caught are putting the money that you spend as a fish keeper back into the place where the people are catching fish. So there's a lot of work to be done, actually.
I'm just going to give a bit of a warning to you and to people watching. I'm really engrossed in what we're talking about already, so I might struggle to stay on track of what the questions are and how we're meant to be timing them. So just a bit of a warning for everybody straight away that I'm well and truly in this vortex. So just okay.
Okay.
What is your day-to-day role as the Project Piaba outreach leader?
So there isn't a typical day. It's sort of the gist of the project is that we sort of, it's all volunteer run. So we don't get paid for any of this. It's all just what is the most critical thing to do at this time. And it's never the same thing day to day. Like we've got a show coming up. Actually in less than a week, we'll be at Super Zoo in Las Vegas, which is it's a trade show for industry professionals, pet industry professionals. So we'll be spreading the word there, and building some exhibits and talking fish at that trade show. So we've been doing a lot of prep in advance of that. We do a lot of work with zoos and aquariums to help them fine tune their messaging, because it's kind of a when you think about public aquariums and zoos, it's an important message because it's conservation. And it's especially important because it's counterintuitive conservation. And a lot of people who come to visit zoos and aquariums are already primed to be conservation-minded people. So helping zoos and aquariums develop messaging and exhibits about Project Piaba and about wild fisheries is another important component of my position.
Okay, cool.
I also do Wild Fish Friday every Friday on YouTube and on our Facebook, Instagram, social media stuff.
Cool. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. It's so this is kind of another thing that I fell into completely backwards. During the pandemic, we had we actually had a trip. We run an expedition every year to Brazil, and we go and visit the fishing communities and the habitat where the fish come from, and just go and check stuff out. And we have a vet on our team who does baseline health assessments of fish throughout the supply chain. So he's got some real sciencey work that he works on. And we just kind of take people and snorkel around and look at the fish and do whatever kind of science needs to happen to support the project. So I had been on the trip in 2020 And we were there the end of January, the beginning of February, which in 2020 was right before, the world ended. And and so we happened to be there, and I was just like, swimming around, taking videos of fish, and I was like, oh, this is cool, I love this, right? And never dreamed that we would do anything with it. And then the world ended, and everyone was kind of like, all of a sudden interested in what can I do from my living room that is like being outside. So I started putting the videos on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and being like, oh, here's, you've seen cardinal tetras before, but have you seen where they live in the wild? And so it was like, they're terrible videos. Like, they're shot on my cell phone. But they're still really valuable to people who who are trying to keep natural fish tanks and aquascapes, and it's good for inspiration and stuff. So as long as you're not tuning into National Geographic, you'll probably have a good time watching the videos, because it's all wild fish and some of the species too. This was probably my favorite part of this whole thing, is that we have a couple of professional ichthyologists who I'll text. I'll be like, oh, I got a fish in this video, and I don't know what it is. Can you help me? And like, so many of them, they're like, oh, that's an undescribed species. We're actually working on that right now.
Cool.
It doesn't have a name, but it's a species of Munchausia. And so it's like, oh wow, here's a fish you've never seen before, right? So now my terrible cell phone videos are actually like, here's a fish you're not going to see.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to be able to like get a jump on stuff like that, because and so that's another thing too that's really interesting about this project, is that since the 1950s, these fish have been exported from the Rio Negro region of Brazil, and there are so many species of fish that have not been exported from the Rio Negro region of Brazil. Like, we're used to seeing the cardinal tetras and the rummy nose tetras and the hatchet fish and the pencil fish and the things like that, but there's 94 described species of Munchausia, and it's probably more like 150.
Wow.
It's there.
Wow.
And they just haven't been described. They haven't been, they're just neat little fish that nobody's ever thought to keep in an aquarium, because nobody's ever heard of them or seen them, and it's like, there they are swimming around. And it's cool, because so the whole basis, like the thing that makes the fishery so beyond sustainable, right? It's actually beneficial to the environment, because it provides people with a way to make a living that protects. So it's not just not messing up the environment; it's actively protecting it. But the thing that makes it so protective of the environment is the actual biology of the fish and how it's linked to the flood and drought cycles of the river, right? So in the Amazon, you have the rainy season and you have the more rainy season, and so during the more rainy season, the water levels rise, but more than what we think of in Boston is like a tide, 10 feet, right? In Brazil, in the Rio Negro region, it's more like 40 feet. So you have places where, it's insane. You have places where, where the rivers are just like totally like just channels, and then these igarapes or these canoe paths that kind of cut through forest, and then when at the high water level, the whole forest is underwater, and it's just the tops of the trees sticking out. So that means a lot to the fish, like, and they're very well adapted to that type of habitat, that when the habitat expands like that, the fish spawn explosively, and then they keep spawning. There's more food available, there's more space, there's more resources in every way, and then they spawn explosively, and then the water levels drop, because that's what they do seasonally, and then if those fish don't get back into the main channel of the river, they dry up in a puddle in the forest. So that's like the main basis of it, is that there's so many fish out there that don't count against next year's population, right? Like if somebody goes and catches them, it's not like that's one less fish that's going to be there next year, because it was doomed. So it really allows the people to have like this inexhaustible resource of live fish, and they're beautiful fish too. Like the other thing too about the Rio Negro in particular is that it's a particularly nutrient poor ecosystem. Like, most of the carbon comes from the forest. It's not like the Mississippi, where there's like all of these sources of food from in the river itself. There's a a bounty season, and then when the water levels are low, there's less, right? So a lot of these fish are small because it's more energy efficient to be a small fish, and that's conducive to the aquarium fish hobby. And also because the water is so dark, like it's black like tea, it doesn't count against you to be brilliantly colored because you're not going to get eaten by a bird because they can't see you. And so it's all these, thousands of species of brilliantly colored tiny fish. That's the perfect storm for aquarists. Like that's what we.
So obviously the cardinal tetra is like your poster boy.
Mhm.
But do you do work with other species as well?
Yeah.
Have you got plans to kind of try and bring some of these species out into the open and turn them into profitable industries as well? Yeah.
Yeah, there's about 250 regularly exported species of aquarium fish that come from the region. Species that you recognize, like the rummy nose tetras, the hatchet fish, the pencil fish, things like that you would splash tetras, angelfish, discus, things like that are very common in the hobby. And then along those lines, there's many that are not common and that have not been described and that have similar population cycles, we suppose, although they haven't necessarily been studied, but probably have similar life histories to cardinal tetras, where they spawn explosively and then experience these giant population reductions. So there are many species that fit the bill for that type of fishery that have just never been brought into the aquarium fish trade. So we're hoping to sort of expose people to that, and to sort of like use that to invigorate the aquarium fish industry, because a lot of people have lost interest in cardinal tetras. Like they were very popular for decades, and now people are like, I've seen them. So it's a way to sort of reinvest people's interest in the river and the other fish that come from there.
Yeah.
Cool.
And also, actually, the other thing that I'll mention is that in 2020, Brazil changed its laws. So they used to have what's called a white list. So it was the species on the list were allowed to be exported. Now they have a blacklist, so they have a list of species that are not allowed to be exported, and anything else is legal. So it's really opened up the door for things that were not described at the time when the list was made, that didn't make it onto the list, things that were omitted from the list, either purposely or accidentally, or hadn't been studied enough to make a decision about. And then it's really put like a lot of different fish on the map. And also the other thing too is when they had the white list, people were afraid to export things that looked like something that wasn't on the list, right? Like there would be, I know what this fish is, but I don't want to export it because it might, the inspectors might be using some kind of key, and when the fish is wearing its stress suit and looks a little bit different, they might misidentify it and get me. So there's a lot of new and different species that will be coming into the market soon as a result of that law change, and stuff like that. So. And also demand too. A lot of times the people who are doing the fish catching are catching the fish that they're asked for by the exporters, and the exporters are asking for the fish that are being ordered by the importers, and the importers don't necessarily know that, hey, there's these other things that we've never seen. So it's kind of like if you always order off the menu, you're never going to get something that's not on the menu.
Yeah, it's true. Like it's quite opens my eyes a little bit when I sort of show what's available from the retail point of view of fish that's available. People go, oh, well, never saw these, never knew we could get all these. Like, it's a massive, massive list of fish.
Yeah.
But I see it every week, and so it doesn't seem like that. But then, like, next person in the chain, everything just opens up a little bit further.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
Just before we move on, Cam, sorry, we've had a question from Rebecca. Just when we're talking about blacklists and whitelists, it's quite relevant to. I'll just bring it up on the screen. She's asking if you're aware of the Neoplecistone mini and similar loricardies are still illegal.
Yeah. So actually, the blacklist now is almost exclusively loricarids. and most of them are from the Xingu because of environmental reasons and overfishing, and that it's a completely different river system with a different type of ecology. So we don't, obviously we're not in the business of promoting anything that's not legal for export or ethical to keep or sustainable, but most of those species do not occur in the Rio Negro.
Okay.
There are some loricarids, and actually really interesting ones that occur within the region that we work in. And so I've seen some weird catfish that are actually, my favorites are the lip rooting catfish. What are they called? Pseudoloricaria. There's like a couple of sandbars in the middle Rio Negro. Nobody's fishing for these fish. Nobody's ever been asked for them. But they're you'll never see a single one in the daytime. But then if you take a bright light out at night, it's just like eyeballs in the sand.
Wow. You mentioned before that wet season goes up, dry season comes down, all the fish that end up basically drying on the ground. I just realized I made a bit of a poem then, but that's beside the point. What kind of a percentage is that get through or don't end up drying out?
I have no idea. This is so this fishery has not had like traditional, like the traditional way to monitor a fishery would be a catch per unit effort study, where you would, the people who are catching the fish would log how much effort they spend and how many fish they catch per that effort. But the industry, the fishing activity is so driven by the demand for the fish that it doesn't work like that. And so they've been, and the biggest argument for the fish populations being highly sustainable year after year after year is that the fish numbers, the number of fish that were exported from Brazil were just astronomical in the 1990s, and they only dropped in response to market demand. And in response to captive raised cardinal tetras coming into the market. There was a really great paper that came out in 2021, I think, that had the numbers of how many fish were exported, and it's really kind of mind blowing to think about how many fish were taken every single year, and then just people stopped fishing for them because they weren't being asked for as many, they weren't selling as many, they weren't. It's really kind of like, I feel like that's probably why the project is the most important reason why the project is important is because there are people who have been fishermen for generations who all of a sudden the market fell out from underneath them through no fault of their own. And so that feels really unfair to be like, oh, well, people took the fish and they bred them somewhere else and they're selling them and they're not giving you any of the money. It's like, isn't that the definition of like evil capitalism?
Give or take.
Yeah. So it's kind of like and it was a rapid change for those people because they were, it was easy to make a living as a fisherman. And then all of a sudden people stopped buying fish. And it kind of happened at, right around 2008 is when everything kind of went bad because there was a global recession. One of the largest exporters of fish from Manaus, which is the hub where the fish get exported from, went out of business the same year that the industrial fish farms were coming online. So there was like this change in market where the fish from Brazil were in a decline at the same time as the fish from Southeast Asia were taking off. So it was really just a perfect storm of you couldn't have built a better situation to put people out of work than.
Oh, wow. That's not ideal at all.
No.
Just before we go any further with our questions, we've been asked, does Project Piaba have any other socials other than YouTube, Insta, and Facebook, TikTok, or a podcast or anything similar to that?
Right now, we just have the YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and the website, projectpiaba.org. I have tried TikTok, and it's sort of, it's a little bit beyond my, we're just a team of volunteers. So it's kind of like, we'll get there someday, but it's a lot. It's a lot of work.
I get it. Stephen would like to know, or do you know, with the carbon tetras being so sensitive, what percentage of them that are harvested from the wild make it to the fish stores alive? Do you have any idea on that kind of ratio?
I don't know what percentage it is, but I do know that the numbers are improving with changes that have been made to the handling and to the nutrition. So for decades, it was probably abysmal. The number of fish that survived. It's a long journey. It's a hard journey. It's about 400 kilometers from the places where the fish are captured to where they're exported from. It's hot. It's one of the most challenging places in the world to keep fish in a tank. Because it gets so hot. And it's also really hard to keep fish food fresh. So there's a real lack of good nutrition. But Project Piaba has been doing a lot of work to improve the handling of the fish. We've established a best handling practices training and protocol for people who are involved at different stages of the fishery to handle the fish more gently at every step. Because one of the things that happens is that for decades people would just scoop the fish in a net, and most of the nets are made out of like mosquito mesh, right? So it's fairly abrasive. It's not like a soft, fine like brine net, right? It's an abrasive like screen. So when you scoop a fish in a net like that, and it like flops and flips, it damages the slime coat of the fish, and can actually cause a lot of damage to that fish. But fish with damaged slime coats are you don't see the damage. You don't even know that fish has been traumatized until weeks later, when it is more susceptible to a bacterial infection or to some kind of viral thing, right? So the fish, like people for decades were handling fish somewhat roughly and had no idea that it was compromising them further down the road, because by that time, so somebody would catch 100,000 cardinal tetras and ship them down the river. They don't start to have losses in those fish until those secondary infections result from that trauma. So, doing like a minimal change, like instead of scooping the fish out of the water in the screen, you kind of corral the fish in the net and then scoop them in a bowl and then put them into what you're holding them. That's such a small change that hadn't been, nobody had ever, it was not something that was ever thought about or talked about. Until we had a team of vets look at it and say, oh, here's a big source of trauma that's easily preventable. Why don't we try to prevent it? So we had a team of Brazilians go in and kind of figure out the best way to impart that culturally, because it's also not appropriate to be like, oh, the way your granddaddy taught you is wrong, because that's not, people don't like to feel like that. But our understanding of fish biology has changed a lot since 1950. And so the handling of the fish should as well. And the other thing too is that now with more we'll call it high-tech fish feed being available, like you can buy a can of fish food that's got like the omega-3s and the probiotics and the good stuff that's specifically formulated for fish. You can buy that, right? People know what makes good nutrition for fish. And it's very different than just like table scraps, which is probably what a lot of people had been feeding their fish for a long time. Dog food and cat food and aquaculture feed that's not, if you feed an aquaculture pellet to a cardinal tetra, if it's made for arapaima, there's no way a cardinal tetra can eat it until it falls apart. And once it falls apart, it's, rotting into bacteria and then causing being another source of infection. So, we've made some changes to the nutrition. We're working with a researcher at IMPO, which is it's a research facility for Amazon subjects in Manaus, and they're developing high quality, high tech fish feeds that are good for cardinal tetras. So they have like a whole lab behind them. And I guess the original question was how many fish don't make it on the journey. And what I'll say is that, probably early in the fishery and up until very recent times, it was probably a very high number. But now We have science behind us. We know how to keep fish alive. Now that number is going down every day, and a lot of the work that we're doing is centered around the health and the welfare of the fish.
Cool.
You can't.
Finn's brought up a really, really good point. Oh, here it is. So are the cardinals really sensitive, or is it they're just really damaged from the time that they get caught to when they actually get to aquariums? So I guess that's something you possibly toyed around with, that question, or a similar type question as well.
I think they're actually really sensitive too. They can't tolerate any damage even in the wild. And that's one of the things that makes the people such fierce protectors of the habitat, right? They can't, if there's some fish that you can't kill no matter what. Cardinal tetras are not on that list. And even if you have even if you purchase a farm raised fish, the advantage that those fish have in the market is that they've been conditioned to eat fish food their entire life. They haven't been exposed to the same parasites. They haven't had the same life experience of being transported for that long down the river, right? So they're more adapted to aquarium life, but they're still fairly sensitive. You can't really get away with a lot with cardinal tetras. There's other species that are probably less sensitive, like a lot of the loricarids are just pretty
bulletproof.
Yeah. There's some they're armored. They're literally armored catfish. So they're little tanks.
How did Project Piaba start, and who founded it, and what's a bit of the backstory on how all of this has come about?
Yeah, so back in 1991, our executive director was involved in looking for fishy field trips, and got involved with a researcher at the University of Amazonas, where they were sort of looking for a fishy place to go and see and do, and they settled on the Rio Negro because there's less mosquitoes than in the rest of the Amazon, and they were like, that sounds like a place. Let's do less mosquitoes. They don't like black water. So they did this field trip, and then our executive director was kind of horrified at the numbers of fish that were being exported in 1991. It was a very large number of fish that were being taken from the wild, and so the initial knee-jerk reaction, as any of us would have had at that time, was, oh my gosh, this is got to be an environmental catastrophe. We got to shut this down. So, but the researcher that he was working with, Dr. Chow, had said, hey, this has been going on for decades, and it only goes up or stays the same. It's not like the fishery is collapsing. And so he was like, I think we better put some effort into finding out why. And then so they studied the populations for a while. They studied the metabolism of cardinal tetras. They studied like a lot of stuff. So for years it was just strictly research into the fishery. And then they were like, oh my gosh, you know what? The people who are fishing for cardinal tetras are not they're not doing slash and burn agriculture. They're not doing cattle ranching. They're not doing gold mining. They're not doing bush meat. They're not poaching turtles. They're like they're out there living in harmony with nature. And that's a stark contrast to the rest of the Amazon that has a lot of these destructive industries just running rampant. And we're pretty confident that the difference is the aquarium fish fishery. People have a way of making a living that supports their families, that requires a clean, healthy environment, right? It's not just like, yes, we like the environment, so we protect it, but we have to protect it because that's how we make our living and support our families, which is different than the rest of the Amazon.
Yeah. When I think of Project Piaba, I think of a couple of key stakeholders in it. The fish are clearly one of the key stakeholders, and then the people in that region that are doing the work are the other ones. Is there any other sort of key stakeholders in what you guys do? Yeah,
the hobbyists. So at the root of it, it's our decisions as fish keepers, right? So it's kind of, so I'm a 90s kid, right? When I grew up, it was like Captain Planet and like Save the Rainforest, and back then the idea was, put the environment in a little plastic box and keep the people out of it, right? And that'll stop people from cutting down the rainforest. But at the root of it, you've got families that are living there and need to protect their, feed their families and support their families and stuff like that. So having a way for them to make a living, right? But the entire thing that drives it is us here going into a fish store and whipping out $20 to buy a couple of fish, right? And that's the whole basis of it. That's what drives all of the chain of money back to these areas that are cash poor and resource rich.
Cool. So when we're thinking of the stakeholders, is it a balance of where your time and effort work, or are you more orientated towards this one and this gives you a trickle down effect for everybody else? How does that kind of work?
Well, we try to think about the ways that we can make the most important impact at the most critical time. And so the thing is that the industry, or the aquarium fish fishery, has been in decline for some years. Again, like I mentioned, the exports of wild fish were going down at the same time that the exports of farm raised fish were going up, right? So we do a lot of we're working on a market initiative where the biggest thing is having people understand that it matters where your fish come from. Like that's an idea that we've been used to for a while for like coffee and chocolate and other products like that. We think about fair trade and where's it come from and where's the money go and how am I supporting the kind of thing that cuts the hands off of orangutans, or am I supporting the kind of thing that protects the habitat, right? So people are thinking about that as they're making their choices, but they haven't necessarily thought about it in terms of their aquariums. And we really should, because it's an important link between, the glass box in my living room is supporting a family in a remote place in the Amazon. And, without me making that distinct choice of where I buy my fish, that family has to do something else, right? Because it's not like the people stop supporting their families if we stop buying fish, right? They have to do something.
Yeah.
How are you trying to champion that idea and that system? Like, I'm assuming that your organization doesn't have the same amount of financial resources as some of these massive corporations that can go, we're doing this for the right of the people, but the reality is they're doing it to make more money.
Right.
How is your approach going to work for that?
That's a good question. And it sounds like you're offering to volunteer. Yeah, we do. It's marketing, and part of it is spreading the word, because a lot of people. So, like I mentioned, when I worked at PetSmart a million years ago, it was people trying to make the right decision, but not knowing what that is, because it's such a counterintuitive thing. So, a lot of the work with the zoos and aquariums really sort of kind of gets people there through exhibit messagery and things like that, and having the information out to people who are buying the fish, but also to people with the fish stores and things like that, because there's a little bit more to it as well. Like, if you're gonna buy a fish that's very sensitive, that's been exposed to parasites, that's been exposed to trauma, that's maybe not been fed great its entire life, because some of that life of its was swimming around in the forest, looking for something that a monkey dropped. So there's like all this extra work that goes into the fish, but it's kind of a marketing initiative to get people used to the idea that it matters. So it's a lot of marketing. It's a lot of the research that's going into the food developments and stuff, and also there's a level of corporate social responsibility too. So like people who make fish food, like for example, we had Sarah, which makes the German fish food that's a really good high quality food. They donated a lot of food to this initiative to help feed the fish better and have more nutritionally sound fish make their way through the supply chain. And that's stuff like that is huge, right? So to a company like that, a pallet of fish food is not it's a drop in the fish market, but to people who are holding fish in these nets in the in the back of the village, and they're feeding them scraps from their own table. having high quality fish food is a game changer for keeping those fish. So it's something that really matters throughout the supply chain. And so we do a lot of stuff like that, trying to like connect people to the best way to make decisions about where you buy your fish, the best way to show that to people, right? Through zoos and aquariums, through our own social media and websites, and through like informed decision making is probably one of the biggest things that we do. Because it matters.
Is there anything? I'm going to use PetSmart because it's one of the only few that I know in sort of bigger American chains. Is there any sort of collaboration or work being done with them to say, hey, look, can we put some stuff up in your shops to show this is a better option than other ways, or is that something that's kind of happening?
Yeah, we're working on developing materials for shop owners and importers, exporters, people throughout the supply chain, because it really starts with awareness and kind of goes from there, right? So once people understand the fishery, it's like, okay, now show this to people. So if you own a fish store and you know about the project, it's then, kind of like what I was doing at PetSmart a million years ago, where I was like, oh, well, have you heard about wild caught fish? And then most people are like, oh, ooh, that's bad. And then it's like, oh, not in this case, maybe you're thinking about cyanide fishing or something somewhere else, but that's not what this is. This is actually a driver of conservation. So there are, we work on a lot of materials and stuff like that to really talk to people and spread the awareness and everything.
Cool. Stephen has asked, is there a way for people to volunteer from home?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I've had a couple of people kind of come through and offer to do like some projects and stuff. We're always looking for people with experience writing grants, for people with, like that's a big one, because that's a particular skill set that, I don't have. And it takes a particular type of skill to be able to effectively write a grant. We're always looking for people to do like, quick, easy things like work on a fish ID guide, or, upload photos, or like, do graphic design and stuff like that. So like we have a large team of people who sort of, we work on these different projects and stuff. And it's kind of, there's definitely opportunities for people to volunteer. Yeah.
Cool. How do you guys balance the needs of like local communities with environmental conservation, especially with like the fish populations in the Amazon? Is there a checks and balance that happens on a regular basis?
Well, most of it. So most of these fish like are sort of, it sort of happens by nature, because really the times when the habitat is flooded and when the fish are spawning, it would make sense to say don't fish now because you're affecting the spawning stock, but it's the habitat is literally inaccessible at those times. It's like you can't, when you think about fisheries in a traditional sense, like where I live in New England, there's a lot of, like trawling and seining and like industrial fishing activities, but this is very different. It's all hand gear based. It's, you can't pull a net through the flooded forest habitat. You'd be snagged up and it's impossible to catch every fish, even if you tried. So it's all done by, they have these big nets they're like as tall as me, and they kind of like scoop them very slowly through like the base of a tree where they think the fish are, and they kind of will like shoo them with a canoe paddle. And, somebody could spend all day at it and not catch all of the fish in that one particular spot. So it's very, it's regulated itself by the system, right? And also the people are such protectors of it that they have like, if you go to the different communities and you talk to the people, like, oh, we like to fish in different places at different times, and like I fished there last week, so I'm going to go to this other place. And like they've got a system worked out in their own minds that's very, it's very like, it's based on their knowledge and experience. And they're very self-policing about that, and preventing each other from doing bad things because it affects everybody's access to the resource.
What I was going to ask, obviously you have rainy seasons where it's really difficult for them to fish. What do they do? I mean, you mentioned also that they've got a local kind of understanding and a system within themselves to allow them to fish at different areas at different times. But is there a point in time where they can't fish anywhere? And what do they do during that time?
Yeah, so it's kind of it's a way of life that's very foreign to think about in most cases. They're very linked to the river, right? So they have the seasonal activity of the fishing, and then people do a lot of very different types of things. Like they make handcrafts. They make one of the main before the aquarium fish industry. One of the main exports was piasava, which is a natural fiber that's used to make like brooms and baskets and things like that.
Oh yeah,
like a root. So there's industries like that, but there's really not a lot of like economic activities that are available. Like you can't just go get a job at Lowe's, or at a store somewhere. There are all these kind of far-flung communities where people live subsistently off of the habitat, and then they have this particular part of the year where they're making money doing the fishing activity, and so they make their money at that time of the year, and then they live the rest
between the two kind of thing. Yeah. Cool.
Over here we've got pretty strong regulations for fishing. Like there's a whitebait season, where it's the only time of the year you can catch these fish. If you catch crayfish, for example, and it's a female and berry with eggs, you got to throw them back and all that sort of stuff. Is there regulations that are there, or is it like legal regulations, or is it all self done? Don't do this because you're going to ruin it for us in the future, or is there rogue fishermen and rogue cat like poachers? Is that a thing, or are they all kind of all on the same page?
That's a great question. So there are some regulations, but it's sort of like a you couldn't cheat them if you tried, like with the seasons, right? And so some of them are related to government benefits that fishermen can collect during the season when they're not allowed to fish. So they make it illegal to fish during that activity, and then they can pay the people so that they're not desperate for the rest of the year. So there's that. But also, like the other thing that I'll point out is that the Amazon is entirely too vast of a place to have it be patrolled by regulation. You could do the most illegal things ever and never be caught by the but if your neighbors know that you're doing it, that's a different story. And if it affects your neighbors' ability to support their families, that's a different story. So that's really why it's so much more effective, is because it's at the level where the community is invested, and it really empowers the communities to police their own area, because it's just too big for the government to do anything about it. Even if they could.
So I'm just going to use round numbers to try and sort of keep it a little bit easier. We've got a community of, say, 100 people. How many of them would be going out and are a part of this fishery system?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer. Because
I mean, is it mainly all adults in the community would go fishing? Are each community dedicated to fishing, or is it divided in between different?
Probably a better way of putting it.
Yeah, so even that is an impossible question for me to answer. So we started work with in 2010. They established a fishermen's cooperative called Orna Pesca, which is sort of it's a loose cooperative of people who fish. So not just the aquarium fish fishers, but also like food fish fishers and people like that. So they kind of have this union, and they have like a couple of meetings a year, and people come from all over. Like there's I was at one meeting once that course, I make it to one meeting a year when we're in Brazil. But these people have meetings throughout the year. But I was at one meeting once where one guy came 18 hours in a canoe to come to the meeting. So it's a incredibly vast habitat.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how he's like, I fished my whole life. My father fished his whole life. His father fished his whole life. I want my kids to be able to fish, but right now we're not making enough money for my kids to do this. So I'm sending them to school in Barcelos, and they have to live with family that's not me, because I live out. I'm still trying to make a living, and I'm doing this 18 hours away. And so it's really kind of it's kind of a completely different sense of community where it's just so vast, right? And people live. There used to be like outposts of fishing communities where people would, here's like a dozen or so families who live in this one place, and they kind of, they're related or whatever, and they go out and they go fishing, and they come back and they sell their fish, and they, everybody knows who everybody is. Now they're sort of like these mobile communities sometimes that are, they're families with boats, and they kind of go up and down the river and go where, different places are around. It's a completely foreign lifestyle to think about, as Americans have a hard time with it. It's kind of like it's very traditional, environment based, people who just kind of go with the river where the opportunities are. Now, like, it used to be much more settled communities, but again, it's sort of, things are, there's no normal anymore. It's things are things are evolving.
Yeah.
What are some of the more significant accomplishments that Project Piaba has achieved over the time it's been established?
I am most personally satisfied with our best handling practices trainings, because those are things that provide a measurable. Well, it's hard to measure. It's hard to measure fish health quantitatively, but things that have resulted in healthier fish throughout the supply chain. So I'm really proud of our ability to do that, because at the end of the day, it's all market competition, right? The wild fish have to be as good in an aquarium as the farm raised ones, especially if they're going to be more expensive, because it costs so much more money to get a fish out of the middle of the Amazon than it does to get them off of a farm in Asia. It's an astronomical amount of money for freight, for like taxes, fees. There's a lot of bureaucratic red tape, things like that. So if the fish are going to be more expensive, they have to be better. So it's resulted in an improvement of fish through the supply chain, and so I'm very happy with that. And it took years really to develop, where we had teams of vets looking at the fish and looking at ways to improve their health and their handling and their nutrition and stuff like that. So that's some really good stuff going on that's made a difference, not just for the health and the welfare of the fish, but also with the fishery and the people who are engaged in the fishery being able to compete in a global market. Because that's really the basis of it, is that the fish have to be competitive in the market.
Yeah, I suppose if you're supplying a subpar product per se, I don't really like using fish as a product, but if you're providing something that's subpar to something else, then no one's going to be interested in the long run.
Yep, exactly.
What are some of the biggest challenges that Project Piaba has faced from both conservation, locally and globally?
So I would say that perception was a really big one. We're starting to make some headway on that, just by talking to people, and by the reach of the internet probably is the biggest thing. Like, that was this would have been impossible in 1990. Like, thank God they weren't farm raising cardinal tetras in 1990, because we wouldn't have been able to spread the word the way that you can now. Like, I can remember I had like these books that I would like rip postcards out of and send them in to get like the information on the fish. If you had to do that now, you just wouldn't be able to spread the word on how wild fisheries are good for the environment in this case. So there's that, but one of the biggest challenges actually right now. So we've got all of this stuff lined up, right? We've got a lot of marketing initiatives. We've got zoos and aquariums that want to participate and spread the word and share the word and inspire people to empower communities and all of this stuff. We've got high quality food going into different parts of the supply chain and healthy fish at all parts of the supply chain. And the environmental agency that inspects agricultural products in Brazil is on strike.
Ah.
So the fish are not being exported at the moment, and it's sort of a they're on strike for the normal reasons why people go on strike. It's not like they're anti-fish, and it's not like it's just the fish either. It's all everything that gets inspected for export is not being processed because of this strike. So that's been a particular challenge is to have everybody sort of queued up and excited and ready for the fish and be like, yeah, great, where can I buy the fish? And it's like, oh, they're on strike right now. So hopefully like soon, because as we know, strikes cannot last forever. there's only so long that you can be on strike for, and either you get your demands met or something. Yeah. So we're hoping that situation resolves quickly, because this happened, or this started happening in January of this year. So there are a lot of people who haven't been paid in a very long time for their work. So there's still a domestic market in Brazil for fish, but it's not as big as the world market. There's a lot more money goes into selling the fish internationally than the domestic markets. There are Brazilian fish keepers, and it's keeping a lot of the businesses in business, but it's not the same, it's not the same ballpark of money making as it was before. So that's been a big challenge. We've written some letters and done some petitioning and stuff like that, but it's not, at the end of the day, we're not the loudest, we're not the squeakiest wheel. And so it's sort of, like I feel bad for the people who are impacted by it, who are not the people who are on strike. And of course you want workers to be treated fairly, whether they work at an airport or anywhere else. But it's kind of it's put a lot of people in a bad situation. So that's probably the biggest challenge right now, is that.
Okay. You're based in America. Is there a global? Sorry, is there a one kind of base where everyone is sort of situated, or is it very much? What's the word I'm after? What's the word that everyone used during COVID?
Remote.
That's the word. Is everybody all remotely based?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. So I am in Boston, in the U.S. Our executive director is also in Boston. We have people all over the world. We have a different we have a Brazilian team that is in Brazil as well, and they're sort of the same way, right? So I'm in Boston. Our executive director's in Boston. We have people who are in DC. We have people who are in there's the boats again, who are in Michigan, and so we're sort of far flung. And you don't have to be in a particular place to work on this project. It helps to be able to, like, we used to be able to, like, see face to face and walk down the hall and be like, oh, hey, how you doing? What do you think about this? Here's the thing that I'm working on for the pamphlets. Do you like it? Yeah, okay, I like it. And you could, like, actually, like, show it to somebody. But now it's just totally different. It doesn't matter anymore. But the Brazil team is the same way. Like, there are some of them that are in Manaus. There are some interns in Barcelos. We have some people in Sao Paulo, and throughout Brazil. So it's not geographically it's not geographically indicated anymore.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about education for a little bit.
Sure.
What is Project Piaba's approach to education? Is there one or two really hot topics that you sort of push towards? Is it an overall reaching thought on education when it comes to wild fish? How is that approach, or how do you work that approach?
Oh, so that's kind of a complicated question. I guess it depends on what exactly you mean by education. Like we do a lot of we'll call it outreach and market influence, although influence is maybe not the right word.
Yep.
Yeah, like kind of teaching people to think about where how their choices matter in a butterfly effect of things. So we do a lot of that, and I think that's probably the most important work that we do. But I've also done just a lot of random work with like science teachers, developing labs and stuff for classrooms. So if you're thinking about education from that standpoint, because the fishery itself has a lot of microcosms of science lessons associated with it, right? There's like there's economics, there's sociology, there's all kinds of things that are associated with the project, but also there's water chemistry, there's like there's deforestation and stuff like that. So if you want to check out our on our YouTube channel, so during the pandemic, I made a lot of videos that are they look like hostage videos because, like lighting and, whatever. It's like, where are you, Jackie? It's like my kitchen. But I made a lot of videos that are activities that you can do that sort of relate to fish and the fishery and river ecosystems and stuff like that. But there's like a deforestation activity where you can plant things on something and then pour water on it and see what happens, and then not plant things on something. So I had this rock in a lasagna pan on my kitchen table that I just covered with dirt. And if you spray it down hard with water, the dirt washes away. Right. But if you plant stuff on it, ooh, look, the water runs down. So it's kind of, we have a lot of activities like that are good for getting young people developing critical thinking skills and getting interested in science, which I think is probably one of the most important things, right? So it doesn't matter what what Jackie Anderson thinks about science or whatever. It's what the next generation thinks, and if they have critical thinking skills to be able to think about the difference between a cardinal tetra fishery in the Rio Negro and North Atlantic cod, or what other fisheries that are maybe less sustainable or beneficial for the environment, right? It's kind of the term fishery is very broad and could mean a lot of different things from a lot of different places. And so having people be aware of what, how their choices impact the environment is really a big thing. So, so
I think absolutely key there. It's not so much what you think, it's what the next generation thinks. And I think the businesses, organizations, companies, people, whatever aspect you want to put into it, the ones that win the world are the ones that understand that the generation coming up is the more important one, not the generation that is currently or has gone before them. And that's how you continue to work and make things grow, is looking essentially behind you what's coming through.
Yeah.
Yep.
You also brought up a little thing for me then. You said about water chemistry. A very, at least here in New Zealand, I'm assuming it's a relatively worldwide type thing. Mindset is, as long as your water conditions are stable, your fish will adapt. Basically saying, as long as your pH doesn't fluctuate a million times a day, then your fish should be okay. How do you find that statement when it comes to wild caught fish? Obviously, they are in very specific water conditions when they're caught. They move around a little bit. Is that a true statement, or are we overlooking so much of them?
It's not just the stability in your tank. It's what happens to that fish at every point in the supply chain. So if it's, if your pH is 7 and the shipping water was 9, that's a problem for that fish. So a lot of fish have issues with transport, and particularly if they're not well conditioned before transport. So one of the things that we're doing is working with exporters to improve acclimation of the fish so that they're more like the water chemistry. So like I mentioned in the Rio Negro, the water chemistry is incredibly unique, and it's different than what most of us can pull off in the rest of the world, right? And the other thing too that makes it particularly dangerous, right? So the pH is very low in the Rio Negro. It's acid. It's basically Coca-Cola. The pH in some of the places is in the 3s. In most of the places, it's in the 4s. And so that the fish are adapted to that, and that's how they thrive. But if you did that in your aquarium, right? If your fish are used to that, if that's what they were transported in, if that's what they lived their whole life in, they'd be fine. But if they are in shipping water and the pH reacts based on organic materials, right? It's also very the water in the Rio Negro is also very it's got a very low conductivity, so there's very low salts in it, so it's not buffered very well. So the pH can change rapidly, particularly in response to organic components. So you put a fish in a bag, the organic stuff that starts happening in that bag raises the pH. And the problem with so nitrogen is exponentially toxic in relation to pH. So you can have cardinal tetras, you can have 1,000 of them in a small tub with ammonia. They don't care if the pH is low. Any form of nitrogen can be in that tub, and it doesn't affect the fish until the pH starts to go up, and then it's exponentially toxic. So that's a situation where it's really dangerous for the fish in transport, because in poorly buffered water, it's going to change in transport in response to the biological activity in the bag. So that's something that we're working on, is with acclimating the fish at the exporters to have them be at a higher pH so that it's not such a change. As most of
Sorry, but when fish get caught by the local fishermen, do they get put into holding, or do they get bagged at the point of the riverside, basically? How does that work?
So what happens now? People catch the fish and they hold them until they have a economically viable number for transport. Okay. So they have, in most cases, the fisherman or the village has they call it a vivero, and it's basically a mesh pen in the river in front of the village or off the side of the boat. So it's like a floating net.
Yeah.
And they keep the fish in there until either, in some cases, people transport their own fish. In many cases, some kind of intermediary comes and picks them up and then takes them. So for you get a lower price if somebody comes to you, but you're not spending the fuel to take off somewhere. So it's kind of a trade-off of, people have different ways of selling their fish. So they're being kept in these net pens then. And then when they get taken by the intermediaries, they get put into these plastic tubs called casapas that are like it's like a I don't know, they're probably about 8 or 10 inches deep. And they're probably, you can pick them up easily and transport them. They're not too heavy. They're, probably about 5 gallons of water. But, in a shallow tub, and they stack on top of each other. So fish get put into those and then brought down the river on a boat in these open pens. So they're not bagged. There's no oxygen, nothing like that, until they get to the export facilities, where they're held for different amounts of times depending on the business model of the particular exporter. So, and also depending on demand, right? So if somebody requests a specific type of fish, there might be demand for that immediately, and they'll be like, oh, okay, I'm going to go catch this weird catfish and then bring it down and sell it, right? But in most cases, it's just like the bread and butter stuff, like the cardinal tetras, the rummy nose tetras, maybe cories, stuff like that gets, that's kind of always in stock and always in demand, gets held for a while, and then, gets shipped out as needed. So.
I've always wondered about that. So that's really thanks for explaining that to me.
Yeah, it's different than you would think about. It's not at all like the way that we bag fish.
Yeah, I mean, I just had it in my head where they catch them and catch enough to go in a bag, and that bag goes in a tub, and then it goes off in a truck straight away. But no, that's quite interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
So
There's
they're basically within their natural environment as long as possible. Then.
Yeah, pretty much. And so
Yeah.
in the river, they're just like, there's no filtration. There's no, in many cases there's not like, the way that we would do this if we were inventing it now, we'd probably have like an extension cord and a pump and like, stuff like that. But there's no technology involved in this that was not there in 1950. It's all exactly the same way. They're caught in the same nets. They're held in the same pens. They're, maybe now the bowl that they use to scoop them out of the water is like a plastic bowl instead of a gourd. For 50 years it was a gourd. Now it's a bowl. And that's the extent of the technology change for that. But we've been doing a lot of work too. So in the best handling practices trainings and stuff like that, there's been a lot of work to kind of expose people at different stages of the supply chain to the science of fish keeping. So like water chemistry test kits and stuff like that. So like, talk, and it's really cool. Like I brought a little show and tell, this little book that one of our volunteers in Brazil made, from their training sessions. And so they had, that was a cool one. So here's people, I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but yeah. So these are fishermen, and they're doing like, science lab type stuff, looking at fish under the microscope. They're doing water chemistry tests that, that's something that people were not really exposed to before. And again, talking about ammonia and nitrates and dissolved oxygen and crowding and stuff like that was really not part of the thought process for decades. And now, the more you know, the better you can be. So it's kind of it's a good thing.
Cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We've had a question from one of the watchers. Are there any unique diseases that can be found in these imported fish, or is it kind of standard across the board?
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on how unique you think parasites are. I guess it depends on the thing. The Rio Negro is very it's very acidic. It's black water. There's not a lot of bacteria that lives there, but those that do are fairly antibiotic resistant. So there are sometimes there's bacterial issues that happen with the fish. It's more likely parasites. So for example, discus are just wormy. They have some kind of gut parasite no matter where you get them from. So a lot of the exporters will just before they even put any of the fish in their systems, they'll deworm them. Just discus, not the cardinals and things like that. Some of them get some kind of treatments, but we're trying to encourage people not to do antibiotics without having a really good handle on how well they're dosing them and what they're treating. Like not to just throw antibiotics around, but a lot of the fish that come in with the worms and the flukes and the stuff like that is really, but none of that stuff is really unique to the system. You'd find it in any wild caught fish, and they're all pretty solvable. The one thing you don't get a lot of ick. You get it if you keep the fish at a cooler temperature, but in most cases, these fish, like if you check out the videos that we have on our YouTube, I've started putting a tag that includes the water chemistry and the temperature, or at least the pH, the temperature, and the conductivity. And in most cases, it's like 83 degrees, which I think is like 28, 29 Celsius. So it's very warm water, which ick can't survive at that temperature. But if you put them in your aquarium, they can sure get it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's very interesting that the most common aquarium disease is the ridiculously uncommon in the wild.
Yeah. Yep.
That's that's quite interesting. I would have assumed that because it's so common in aquariums, it'd be quite common in that, but yeah, obviously not.
It's too hot. Too hot.
Wow. You've spoken about acclimatization processes and how you've sort of been involved in education on that. So how has that come about, and what is the process that you promote or encourage?
Well, that's kind of different for everybody depending on what situation they have. And a lot of the exporters have really sort of they've started to think about it in terms of like having their fish survive shipment better. So most of it was like trial and error, like all these fish in this shipment died, so let's try something different. But so the water is very different in Manaus. So where most of the fish get exported from, there's river water, which is going to have a lower pH, but close to Manaus is close to where the Rio Negro meets the Amazon. So the water chemistry is different there than it is up where the fishing is taking place. It's much lower further up the river and more influenced by rainwater than it is by the water chemistry of the Amazon pushing up. But there's also well water that some of the exporters use, and they'll sort of mix river water with well water. And there was even one guy that we went to tour his facility, and he showed us his water operation. And what he used was he would fill these giant cisterns with well water, and he told us, like, oh yeah, if you take the well water and you put it directly into the aquariums, all the fish die. But if you take the well water and you just throw an air stone in it, let it circulate for 2 days, everything's fine. We were like, is there some kind of carbon dioxide off gas situation going on here? Like, what is that? But he knew, he understood the operation of his water. He hadn't tested it. He didn't know what it was that would kill the fish about it, but he knew that it would. So he had that worked out. And the well water had a much higher pH than the river water. So a lot of them will sort of mix water a little bit to try to get there and acclimate the fish a little bit more gently. But so it's not like you can't give like a standard practice. It's more like try to get to a neutral pH over at least a week. But how you do that is going to depend on the resources that you have at the facility that you're at. So it's kind of it's a difficult thing to manage, because there's not like a one cut and paste SOP that you can put together to say, here's how you do this. It's like it's as much of an art as it is a science, unfortunately.
That makes sense. Has Project Piaba formed any significant partnerships with other organizations or businesses, government agencies, and like that to sort of help promote where you're going and what you're wanting to achieve?
That's kind of a tricky question. Yeah, we have a lot of partnerships with a lot of different entities within the industry, and within so our partnership with INPA to do the research on the fish nutrition is a big one. And they're particularly important because they are there in Brazil. And so I think it's important to involve the local scientists in the administration of the local, the things that affect the local people should be done by the local scientists. And that's probably the best, highest impact way to do things. We've done a lot of work with the World Pet Association. They've given us a lot of grants. We're working on some of this marketing stuff, and a lot of the materials and things that we use to spread the word, and to sort of we've had our best handling practices were sponsored by different entities. So the World Pet Association sponsored some of that. We had a couple of different aquariums have sponsored different aspects of it, and things like that. Yeah, we don't exist in a vacuum, for sure. We depend on certainly the money from other parts of the industry, but also a lot of the expertise, in coming up with things.
Cool. Is there any sort of scientific research that's happening or has recently happened that Project Piaba has been involved in and sort of help push forward on the overall project?
That's another good question. We've had so on our website you'll find a list of papers, scientific papers that have been published over the decades. So that's projectpiaba.org. There's a tab for publications, and so you can see that stuff. So there's been a lot of work done on like the export numbers of fish within the fishery. We are hoping to come up with a paper from about the nutrition study that we're working on now. There's been a lot of socioeconomic stuff. So for decades, our Brazil team was run by a woman, Mari Balsan, who is a sociologist by training, because it's as much as this is an environmental project, it's also a sociology project. It depends on people making environmentally based decisions by having environmentally related industries. So it's as much a social science project as it is a science project. So there's that. And I would encourage anybody to check out our paper list, because you can really get lost in the papers. There's there's a lot of good stuff on the website. And actually one of my favorites was the one that came out that talked about the economic collapse of the fishery since 2008. That was the one that was really like kind of mind blowing. Where it's like, wow, it's impressive to think about how many people made such a large percentage of their income off of this industry, and then just cardinal tetras from the wild and cardinal tetras from the farms. It's just like, whoa, that's just a big. This is a scary paper to read, but it's important to at least understand where it's coming from and why it matters. Because there's 3.8 million people who live in the state of Amazonas, and you can't just pull the rug out from under them and not expect them to do something. So.
And all of these papers and documents are available on the Project Piaba website?
Yep, they're on our website. And I know, so we recently got a new website. We had a volunteer work tirelessly on creating a new website for us. Cool. And we launched it a couple of months ago. And then unfortunately, we didn't realize that the links weren't working on the papers. They didn't get migrated over from the old website. And so, but that was fixed this weekend. So I feel confident sending you that way because I know it works now.
Awesome. There you go, people. There's some light weekend reading for everybody.
Yes. Get lost in the middle.
When I think of Project Piaba, I think fishermen, I'm talking about the supply chain, fishermen, exporter, importer, store, hobbyist.
Mm-hmm.
Going this direction, there's people that have got things in place to make things improve. Going the other direction, hobbyist, store, importer, exporter, blah, blah, blah. What way can we as hobbyists or shop owners help not only just Project Piaba, but in general for the fisheries and the system that has been put in place going that way to go back? Does that make sense?
Yeah. The most important thing that I tell people, the most important thing that any individual hobbyist can do is care. Right. So once you care, once you have this idea in your head that I think that there is value in supporting the wild fishery and the communities that protect the rainforest. Once you have that, once you care, you can make decisions that put your money where your care is. Right. And you're thinking creating the market demand and driving, say I learned about this, about Project Piaba and about the beneficial wild fisheries, but the fish store that I shop at doesn't know about it, right? At the heart of it, people who own fish stores, yes, it's a business, but they respond to the desires of their customers in most cases, right? So if you, if you are a fish keeper and you want to get involved and you want to keep these fish, you can have a conversation with the place where you buy your fish, because many cases, the fish are available once the strike is over. The fish are available from many of the regular suppliers that supply the fish stores. So if it's a choice, right, that you can make as a fish keeper to buy the fish, but also as a shop owner to buy the fish. And also, like, you know, if those fish require a different kind of effort, like hopefully once all of the best handling practices and nutrition and acclimation and all of that stuff, hopefully we'll you know, volunteer ourselves right out of a job and fix everything that's wrong and then never have to do it again. But once all that stuff is sorted out, there won't be so much extra effort that goes into keeping those fish. But if you're a shop owner and you get these sensitive little fish, putting the extra effort into them is worth it if you understand why. Yeah. Because in many cases you could go, oh, I never buy those because they're a pain in the butt. You know, I gotta deal with them. I gotta feed them extra. I gotta, you know, they might have parasites. I gotta keep them separated. But one of the other cool things that we're working on, and this is like 90% there. We have a volunteer in Brazil who's working on this right now. Is traceability. So the fish themselves, I don't know if I have the no, I don't have it here, but the fish themselves are the first living animal to have geographic indication, which is like you know how authentic champagne is from France. Authentic cardinal tetras are from the Rio Negro. So they're the first living animal to have geographic indication.
That is cool.
Yeah, isn't that neat? Part of that is also having traceability through the supply chain. So and hopefully I'm crossing my fingers. Hopefully that will be retainable through the entire supply chain. So ideally, at the end of the day, we would like to have somebody be able to walk into a fish store, buy a fish, scan a QR code off of the, you know, a tank cling, and know which tributary that fish came from. And this is really cool particularly for people who keep biotope aquariums.
I was going to say that's like really cool.
Yeah. And then not only know which tributary your fish came from, but which fisherman caught your fish, which community they're part of, and things. So it adds value to the fish, to the end consumer. And
I think if you were them to go into a fish shop and get a fish and take it home and then understand where it came from, who caught it, and then you can deep dive into their culture.
Yep.
You know, that adds so much value on so many levels.
Yep.
That goes
really
beyond
cool.
fish keeping as a hobby, that it verges into the educational purposes and everything. I think if you can achieve that, that would be a fantastic contribution to the industry and the hobby in general.
Yeah, the woman who's working on it, the volunteer who's working on it now, was involved in the app development for Arapaima for the food fish industry in Brazil. So she's Brazilian, but she worked on that. So she's, you know, working on ways to apply it to aquarium fish the same way that they had it with Arapaima. The challenge is that you can't microchip a cardinal tetra. So it's got to go more with the tub of fish. So again, that's another thing that will require just an extra step from people at different points of the supply chain, like keeping the fish separated. Like you can't just get a shipment of them and put them all in together if some are from Daraqua and some are from Panamá and some are from, you know, different igarapes. But that extra effort is worth it if your end consumer, if the hobbyist says, I want to know where my fish came from, you know, that adds value to that fish and can be kind of kicked up the supply chain. That, you know, if people know that it matters, then they do it.
Yeah. I when you said that, there's a local chip or crisps shop producer just down the road from me, and on the back of their packets they say who made it, like the name of the staff member, the time, the date, what brand of potatoes, like the whole thing. And like anytime I look at the back of the packet, I go, man, that is fantastic. They've just given you all this information on this one batch of chip.
Yeah. Who makes the best tasting chips?
Yeah, I didn't like Jimmy's ones, but Peter's ones are amazing, or what have you.
And I thought when you buy tuna in a tin, it tells you the the boat that caught it. I thought that was cool.
Yep.
But then,
Yeah, it's the same idea. It can be applied to our aquarium fish, and it's very cool.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
And hopefully that can get off the ground and up and running then, because that I could see that having a massive effect on it's like you said on biotope aquarium keepers and fantastic.
It's worth the investment in time because I mean it's such a neat.
Could you imagine having it producing a book?
Yeah.
With cardinals and breaking down every location in a section within the book.
Yep.
That'd be really, really cool.
Yep.
Really
I would
cool.
love that. Yeah. And some of the some of the biotope people are like particularly invested in that kind of stuff, but also like the other fish that come from those.
Yeah.
So once you have that information, you know, there are so many weird fish that come from like particular places that, you know, like I've got, you know, a million grainy cell phone videos of all of these fish that are, you know, here's what's swimming with cardinal tetras at this particular igarape. So it's useful to retain that information and you know, see what's there. It's neat.
No, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of information out there now within the biotope community. So to find the location is sometimes difficult, and it generalizes in a lot of the situations as well. So to have that very specific catch location is phenomenal.
Yep. Yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Super.
The other thing that I was going to mention, so it's our executive director, his favorite thing to think about with traceability and the biotopes and everything like that is he likes to think about like every nuance of the fish habitat, including like, you know, if you had a plug strip that was programmed to take like some Google Earth data from the place where the fish came from, you could program it to have your lights turn on at the same time that the sun rises.
Yeah. We've had somebody who's talked about developing a light like that, and I thought you just type in the what was it, the geographical location basically, and it timed it in exact.
Yep.
And I thought,
it's just data where you know you could have it get its data from somewhere that is specific to that place, and then you know, you could have the heater, you know, hooked up to know the temperature, and you know.
Oh no, it's endless. The possibilities are endless when you come to that, and then imagine entering an aquarium that is tied in to that extreme to one of the contests. You know, you just watch it, and it's like you are transported to that location.
Yeah, you'd have to win. You'd have to win.
Yeah.
You'd be a bit disappointed if you didn't.
Yeah, for sure.
I know.
How can everyday fish keepers and aquarium enthusiasts get involved with Project Piaba? Is there some practical ways they can support your mission and your organization?
They could follow us on our socials and our outlets and stuff like that, and stay up to date with what we're working on. If they're local to any of the places that we're doing a show or something like that, we love to meet people and you know, answer questions and stuff like that. We do expeditions yearly, so people could come on an expedition and spend some time with us in the field. This year's expedition is sold out, which I'm pretty excited about. We've not been sold out this early in the year ever since I've been involved. So that's pretty cool. But we go the end of January, beginning of February every year, and view the fishery and the habitat from source to sink. We go to the fishing communities and we go through every step of the supply chain up and down the river to see the stuff. And so that's a really fun way to be involved. And again, like I said, the best way to get involved is to be aware of where your fish are coming from and to you know, have conversations with people and ask about that. Anybody can email me or can, you know, hit us up on the website. There's a contact thing there if people wanted to get involved. In other ways, of course, we accept donations. That's all of how we get our funding is donations and grants and stuff. And if any grant writers are out there watching, we'd love to have you. So yeah, there's ways to get involved beyond, but again, the most important way is to care about where the fish come from and how your your decisions as a fish keeper affect the rest of the world.
Mhm.
I was going to ask how the organisation is funded. Is it predominantly via donations and grants, or do you have like a side stream, like you've said, you've sold out the expedition? Does that help funding, or is it other things, or is it?
So the expedition is probably the biggest source of funding. So if anyone was looking for a vacation with a purpose, that's kind of what it is. So like people spend money to participate in the expedition, and then that gets us there in the field and gets us and our Brazil team up the river and to the places to meet with the people and to do the things and to accomplish our objectives for the year. And so there's that. It's an important source of funding for us, but also everything is just donation based. Everything is donation based.
How long does one of the expeditions last?
They're usually about 10 days, 10 days, 2 weeks, depending on how you count it. Like if you get there in the middle of the night, and then go up the river. But we usually get about 10 solid days on the boat, and so we go up the river and then come back down, because it's really the only, you could fly, I guess, but it's really the only way to travel the Amazon. Like there's no, there's not a lot of roads. Certainly don't go. They just go around the cities. They're not, up and down the river at all. So it's it's a couple weeks, and then usually a number of us will stay a couple of days extra after the trip and go tour some export facilities and sort of meet with other scientists and researchers and people who are involved in the project. So that kind of stuff is less interesting to most people who want to go on a trip. So we don't drag everybody along on that. But there, some people, like, people who own fish stores or fish businesses are more likely to have an interest in seeing the export facilities and stuff like that. So that would be an extra activity, but it's very affordable to stay in Brazil for a few extra days and do stuff like that. It's not like if you had to do it here, what it would cost.
It'd be a different ballgame.
Yeah.
Is there opportunities for people to volunteer their time and their services, or is that kind of relatively well sewn up within the organization per se?
There are, if somebody had like so again, all of it is sort of dependent upon my ability to come up with stuff. Like I've had a couple people reach out to me and be like, oh, I'm a student studying such and such, and I'm looking for a project. And it's like, okay, I can come up with something for you. But it sort of is, it hinges on my ability to be able to, to jump that ball. So like, if people really wanted to get involved, yes, we have stuff like that. But, if it's just like, oh, I'm looking for an easy 1 credit over the summer, it's like, okay, maybe not. But yeah, like we've had people do that. So.
And if there are people that are interested in donating or financially supporting your organization, how would they go about doing that? This is a 100% shame-free plug. Go for gold. Sure.
Yeah, there's a tab on our website, projectpiaba.org. It's donate, get involved or donate. And that's 100% tax deductible. We're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. So you can write it off on your taxes and feel good about it. So there's that. Yeah.
Cool. What are some of the future goals and visions that Project Piaba are working on or have coming through?
Oh man, I can't wait for the strike to be over, because we've done so much work on fish health and nutrition that I can't wait to see how there's plans to quantitatively test the way that the fish that have been handled using the new methods perform compared to the old methods, right? So we've got, exporters who have committed to bringing different batches of fish through, and I can't wait to see how that shakes out. But again, that's going to be once the strike is over, which can't be long now.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Hopefully, as we're speaking about it right now.
How good would that be?
Yeah.
Where am I at on my list? There I am. How are you planning to expand the impact over the coming years regarding conservation and community development?
I think, well, right now it's sort of is like we've for a long time operated under how do we, we've not been in a comfortable position in a long time. So it's always how do we best respond to this crisis? So, I mean, in the long-term plan, it would be great to be able to be oh, we've got, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But right now, our biggest part of the plan is to just improve the health and welfare of the fish to the point where they can outcompete any other competition in the market. And that's really the gist of it is having a bomb-proof fish that, that can hold its own in the market, and give people the options to make an educated choice when they're picking a fish. So that's kind of the best part of the plan.
You mentioned earlier along the lines of sustainable coffee and chocolate organizations, and the word I'm after, industries.
Mm-hmm.
How does Project Piaba sort of align with that type of work when it comes to conservation? Is there a massive negative impact prior to what's happening? Like you're saying, cutting the hands off orangutans. Is that sort of stuff prevalent in the field that you guys are working in, or is it just not existent?
It's not. So here's the thing. It's not rampant in the part of the Amazon that we're working in, but it is throughout the rest of the Amazon. Not orangutans, obviously, because they're Asian, but there's a lot of development at the expense of the environment in the rest of the Amazon. So what we are hoping to accomplish is to prevent the destruction. So it's kind of a difficult position to be in, to be screaming the sky is falling when it's not. It's more like the sky might fall if we stop doing X, Y, and Z. So it's sort of preventing something bad from happening is always much harder than responding to a crisis. And so it's kind of, it's a difficult position to be in, because, I don't have my crystal ball, but I do know that when people don't have a way of making a living, they will find a way of making a living.
Yeah. And sadly, sometimes that veers into illegal industries as well, unfortunately, because that's something more profitable.
Yep.
It's a shame.
Is deforestation a massive impact there? Obviously that seems to be the global catch cry or catchphrase at the moment. Is that impacting?
Yeah. So there's a lot of there's deforestation for cattle ranches, right? So there's people who are building these giant farms to ranch cattle in the southern Amazon, and there are more and more popping up in this area that didn't exist before. And there's a lot more. There's slash and burn for one of the things that I've seen that sort of took me by surprise, right? It's not even like lumber. It's not lumber like you'd think of it in the US or in Canada. It's charcoal. They cut down the rainforest, they make charcoal, and then they ship it out burnt. So it's, you're looking at hundreds of years old mahogany trees that are just, charcoal. So it's probably one of the saddest things that you can imagine in a couple of spots that I saw last year that I had not seen before. So it's happening, but is much less of an impact than it is in other parts of the Amazon.
Right.
But I don't want to give it a chance to run away.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, that brings us to the end of our structured questions that we have had for you. So thank you very much for that.
No problem.
We'd like to end our Finatics Friday Coffee Dates with a quick school of 6. So there's a very quick, short answer questions that aren't there to put you on the spot, but sometimes they do.
Okay.
So my first question would be, during a coin toss, do you call heads or tails?
Ooh, tails.
Cool. Are you a tea or a coffee drinker?
Coffee. Unless it's iced tea.
Fair enough. Are we alone in the universe?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Yeah. How can we know? But yeah.
Yeah.
If you could have a meal with absolutely anybody from any point in time, alive or dead or fictional or real, who would that be?
Oh, man. Teddy Roosevelt.
Cool. That's the one that normally stumps people. Paper, scissors, rocks. What's your first call?
Paper to rocks? What?
Paper, scissors, rocks.
Paper.
Cool. What's your unicorn fish that you've either worked with, taken photos of, swam with, spawned? What is that one fish that you would like to be involved with?
Oh, man. That is a hard one. That is a really hard one. There is a fish called Hemigrammus stictus that lives in the same habitat as cardinal tetras, but are very they're really rare in the aquarium fish trade. Picture the reddest red that you've ever seen, just on the tail.
Oh, wow.
Neat fish.
Cool. And the last question, which now makes 7, is where can people find you, or if not you, Project Piaba? Again, another shameless plug. Go for gold.
Check out our website, projectpiaba.org. Check out our YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram. Again, we're all volunteer based. So I try my best to keep those things updated. And at the very least, I do a Wild Fish Friday every Friday. So if you want to see some unique fish in their wild habitat, tune in every Friday. At the very least, you'll see a fish video.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It has been greatly appreciated. You've definitely opened my eyes. I'm sure you've opened a few other people's eyes. It's fantastic. There's some people doing this sort of work in the aquarium industry. So thank you very much for coming on with us. It's much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. Thank you everyone for watching as well. Without you watching, there's not a lot of point of us doing this. So it's greatly appreciated too. So hope you all have a really good Friday or Thursday or whatever time of the day it is for you now. So have a good one, team. Happy fish keeping, and catch you later.